Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is actually two short stories, a very small collection called The Countess of Haberlund and The Stagecoach by Klaus Viedenz, also known as the Contradictorian on YouTube. Yes, he is a very passionate booktuber, a reviewer of books, and I discovered him recently while I was looking for other reviews about Rebels Creed after I uploaded my own to see if the consensus was very similar. And indeed, he had many more critical things to say about it than I did. Well, maybe not many more, but let's just say he presented himself somewhat differently.
Rebels Creed by Daniel Green. I hated this book.
He's a very entertaining guy, so if you haven't checked him out, go check out his channel. And I'm pretty new to this whole authortube YouTube community. I kind of just do my own thing and don't really pay much attention to it. But I am very fascinated by the work that people do, the books that they put out. And he only has one in English anyway. It's 36 pages, only $1 on Amazon. So I thought I'd give it a shot because, you know, I appreciate his commentary and his attention to detail on a line-by-line basis. I mean, he has these little bookmarkers he puts in books. I don't do anything like that. I just try to give a brief overview of my thoughts and attribute it to storytelling craft. So let us get on with the review of The Countess of Haberlund and The Stagecoach. So let us begin with the first short story, The Countess of Haberlund. It's about an assassination by, of course, an assassin. We are in first person, so we get an intimate look into this person's head. And I enjoy reading the voice like this. And if you ever read something in first person versus third person, even though you can tell something in limited third person from a very, very close POV. For some reason, first person just tends to be written differently. I find myself writing differently when I write in first person than I do in third person, even more so than the obvious pronoun switch. And that can be seen here as well. And so I don't want to give away the plot or anything like that, but let's just say this character has a very strong voice, so I appreciated that from a character standpoint. And there is indeed a hook, a dilemma, and a resolution, kind of, which leads us to the second story, The Stagecoach. This centers around a stagecoach, surprise, surprise, where we have a colorful collection of characters. We have a merchant, we have a knight, we have the stagecoach driver, of course, we have a son, we have a lady of the night and her daughter, and like I said, a massive cast of characters all in the stagecoach, which essentially makes it kind of a bottle episode, if you remember those from sitcoms. We don't really leave the stagecoach for the vast majority of this story, and essentially what it amounts to is sort of a rapid fire back and forth dialogue, having an argument about something I don't want to get into to spoil it for you. And there's somewhat of a clever use of switching the POV. So throughout the course of the story, you go from one character to the next. And I really like the way he began it with interior monologue. So the very first line would immediately be the interior thought of the character you were jumping to. I have comments on that, but I'll get to that when I talk about the writing itself. And as much as I like the voice of the first character, the assassin, in the first short story, you could see some of that voice bleeding into these characters. So that would be one of my main complaints about character here is they didn't feel very distinct. They all kind of felt like a very similar voice. And so I think the distinction there was difficult at times to perceive. And so it kind of just made things fall short a little bit for me. And some of these personalities, while I appreciate exaggerated personality, I think when everybody's personality is exaggerated, and that's kind of what I got the feeling for here, is it kind of felt like a Monty Python skit. Exclamation points everywhere, people excitedly speaking about all manner of subject, which brings me to the POV again. I think that is another failing here aside from the voice of the character. So usually when you get inside of a character's head, when you're telling a story from the POV of a certain character, you want to perceive the world through their eyes. You want to learn about what kind of person this is through their observations, right? And unfortunately, 90%, the vast majority of these scenes inside of this stagecoach are telegraphed through dialogue only. There's not a lot of observation from that character, which doesn't only illuminate what's going on in the scene, but the perception of that character, the POV character, which in fact relays the quality of their character through those observations, so you get to know who they are more. Whereas I felt like here, it was so much external observation that we didn't get this POV character to internalize those things so we could get a better understanding of who this person was and what they were about. So unfortunately, I felt like it was a strong start with the voice of the character in the assassin story, but then you quickly find out that the author had a difficult time time balancing all of these characters and coming up with unique voices for every single POV. So for plot, there's not much to talk about plot because I don't want to spoil anything. These are very short stories. Not a lot happens in them, but I think there is one thing I can say about it. So there is quite a bit of world building done in the short amount of time you spend with these characters and this world. A lot of it is told in exposition, unfortunately, where it doesn't feel like brief asides of exposition coupled with dialogue and character action that really help us feel this world and all of its colors and detail. But on that note, I would like to say that I write a lot of short stories. You guys know, if you follow my channel, I've written 74 short stories on YouTube for about a year and a half. So I've really started studying the craft, or I've learned the craft of telling a short story. And honestly, these don't feel like short stories to me. So a short story is more than a story that is short. A short story needs to feel like a longer story, right? With all of the elements, all of the 5 commandments of storytelling, as Sean Coyne from StoryGrid likes to say. So we are left breathless at the end of this tale, or in deep introspective thought. And these 2 stories, they feel like chapters in a longer book, right? They feel like a world building exercise. They feel like a character exploration or character explorations. They feel like the author is trying to dip his feet into this world, which really appears to have a lot of detail in it and almost too much to fit into these short stories. And you can tell with these heavy blocks of exposition that he really wanted to put those in there because it felt like an important aspect to get across. But honestly, when you're talking about short stories, world building definitely is important, right? You want to understand where you are, what you're dealing with, what these characters are dealing with. But you got to be careful to hold back, resist the temptation to info dump too much in a short amount of time, because as readers, we don't care so much about that. We like to learn about the world and learn about the culture throughout the course of a novel or a story, but we don't care about the information so much. It's more about how it applies to the characters who live within that world. And so that is why I feel like it's a little bit difficult calling these short stories by the way I define them. These are stories, they are short, but like I said, they feel more like chapters in a longer work. So let us move on to the writing itself, or how I like to refer to it, the cinematography of the story. Well, the first tale is told in first person, and we get very deeply, I feel like, in the head of the character, so it's an interesting thing. There's a couple of odd things, though. There's interior monologue indicated by italics. I don't think you need that in first person, because we are literally always deeply in the head of the protagonist, so it kind of felt out of place. And I think this is a thing to say globally about the writing, is that there was a lot of typos in here. There were a lot of misused English words. And I know the author, English is not his first language, so that is completely fair. But if you're publishing something, if you're putting yourself out there on an English market or whatever language you are putting your book in, please hire a proofreader at the very least. They're cheap. They would have caught all of these errors, and I think it would have presented this short collection in a better light if it would have had that kind of editorial polish. Secondly, there's very long paragraphs. I felt like the author didn't quite understand how to break up paragraphs, and I think paragraphs are one of those things where, yes, there are rules, but yes, they are there to be broken. You want to do it in a logical way. I think you want to do it not only when it feels like the topic of something is changing, but we also want to do it in such a way to drive the pace of a story. I talk about white space a lot, and the last thing I want to read is a massive paragraph without any breaks. And there were plenty of times when I read this where there were massive paragraphs where I could see logical breaks that you could create here. So that kind of ruins the pacing a little bit, makes it a little bit harder to read, at least for me, but I am a fan of white space. So let's get back into the Stagecoach, story number 2, and talk about this a little bit. So this is a collection of scenes from all of the different, or many different POVs of the characters in the Stagecoach, and what happens in that Stagecoach and outside of that Stagecoach. And again, this kind of blends from character in the writing, but these characters, for the most part, were kind of hard to distinguish from their dialogue alone, from their actions, from their observations. It almost felt like somewhat of a split personality person, where those split personalities still had echoes of the original personality throughout. And so unfortunately, while I think there was a lot of opportunity here to create an interesting array of characters with different voices, it just wasn't done. And one thing I need to note about interior monologue, if something is italicized, that instantly makes us know it's interior thought. We do not need to say he thought, she thought, so-and-so thought, anything like that. And you can see that here quite a bit. I noticed that a lot in fantasy novels. It's funny, I brought it up when I talked about Daniel Green's books. And it's strange to me because, you know, if it's not italicized, you want to say he thought, so you know someone's thinking. But, you know, most of the time, 99% of the time, italicized text means someone is thinking. Now you can use it for different means. You can use it. Sometimes I like to use it when someone in the past has said something, but I very clearly state that this is something someone said. I just prefer the look of italics in those instances versus quotation marks, because then it just feels too much like dialogue. And it's one of those things I'm sure plenty of people disagree with me with, but that's how I like to approach it. So while I think there's a lot of promise in the writing here, I think there's something there. It just needs a lot of editorial work. It needs a more solid understanding on breaking up paragraphs, obviously the punctuation, the grammar, stuff like that. But more importantly, I think the one thing it's missing is the depth of distinguishing one character from another. So with all that said, I'm going to give the Countess of Haberlund and the Stagecoach a 4 out of 10. I feel like it has an interesting voice. However, that voice, when it first took me in the beginning, bled over into the other characters. And so that really took me out of the experience. It made me feel as if the author could only really write in one voice, or maybe just enjoyed writing into that voice. And in which case, maybe don't spread it across a bunch of characters, focus on one character. And this thing is just riddled with typos, grammatical problems, etc., etc., that could have been completely mitigated by hiring a proofreader at the very least. And 2 stories that are short, but didn't really feel like short stories to me. They felt more like small pieces of a bigger work, a way for the author to dip his toe into figuring out his world so he can write this sprawling novel. So when I finished these, I didn't really feel like I was left thinking about something. That's really what I like to do when I finish a short story, or any book for that moment. I like to have that last line breathe a little bit, an echo in my mind. So it could be a cliffhanger, it could be a cathartic conclusion, it could be something that's left unresolved, and the emptiness in that space is really what makes it resonate. So I hope you enjoyed the review. If you'd like to check out my own work, check out my novels in the description below. Also my Worth 1,000 Words series, where I write a 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork every single week without an outline. Give me a like if you liked the video. Join my Discord. Come hang out with me. We can talk about books. We can talk about movies. We can talk about all kinds of stuff story related with a bunch of people who are interested in just that. All my stuff is down in the description. So thanks again for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.